RMC is supported by MonsterJoysticks.com. Level up your retro gaming with their joysticks featuring genuine Sanwa arcade parts. And OneClickPrint.com for your photos on canvas, acrylic, gifts and more. Local craftsmen and global delivery. Hello cave dwellers, welcome to the cave. We finally have some SGI hardware down here, and weighing in at 25 kilograms, I can tell you it was no small task lugging it down the steps into the cave, but it's here and it's the creation of SGI, a company that was founded in California in 1981, where founder Jim Clark's vision was to create the most powerful 3D workstation hardware money could buy. This particular model, the Octane, was available from 1997 through to 2000, and then the Octane 2 for a few years more, but not long after the turn of the millennium, SGI began to explore the creation of Intel CPU-based machines and shifted their focus to supercomputing over 3D graphics workstations. Unsuccessfully, I might add. It's not their last model, but it's certainly one of the later models designed specifically to hit that brief of being powerful 3D workstation hardware before their focus shifted elsewhere. So that for me makes it an extremely exciting prospect to tear down, to get to know and to try and understand better. It's all thanks to cave dweller Kai, so join me in thanking Kai for donating the machine to the cave for us to look at today. And I think we'll begin by trying to understand exactly what this was used for and what it could do when in the right hands.
We don't have time to horse around. We don't have time to use toys instead of tools. We have to buy the best available tools for these people. And every time we look, it comes out SGI. And we love Octane.
It's very easy to use, and it's doing a lot to change the way we do business here. And it is years ahead of the competition. There's nobody else out there that has this tool available.
As an engineer, we need high-performance workstations so we can run more iterations of analysis on larger models so we can optimize our design faster.
Among other people, Steve Jobs then popping up there as he became a majority shareholder of Pixar in the 80s, hence his appearance. And Pixar made heavy use of our Octane on projects such as Toy Story 2 released in 1999. Final rendering of the movie would of course be completed by a farm of high-end SGI servers, but the modelling and creation of the movie was completed on Octanes which talked to those servers. Apparently at one point in the movie's creation, a single Octane at Pixar became known as the $1 million machine, after the Toy Story 2 folder structure was accidentally erased and Pixar's backups were found not to have been working correctly. Luckily, the supervising technical director had an Octane at home which held a full and nearly up-to-date copy of the entire movie, and that machine was very carefully collected and returned to Pixar HQ to save the movie and thousands of man-hours of work. I digress, however. Toy Story 2 is just one of many examples of movies created using SGI hardware. Ice Age, Lord of the Rings and The Matrix are others which specifically utilised our Octane. And on older SGI models, credits include Jurassic Park, which not only created the dinosaurs but also cast the hardware in the movie.
It's a Unix system. I know this. It's all the files of the whole park.
As well as The Mummy, Terminator 2, Starship Troopers, Star Wars Episode 1, Shrek, Twister, Ants and The Abyss in 1988. The list of movies SGI played a part in is a long one indeed. So you get the idea then, our mean green machine was at the forefront of 3D animation and computer graphics being used in the movies that we all know and love. More quietly, behind the scenes, it was being used for intensive computer-aided design, simulation modelling, and, well, anything mathematically intensive really for those with the budget to afford one. At the time of release, January 1997, SGI held 70% of the 3D workstation market, so clearly those with the influence and those who were decision-making in those industries considered that the price tag was worth it for these machines. But just what was that price tag for an Octane, and specifically for the Octane on the table here today? Well, the price would vary a lot depending on what options we found inside, but the very, very cheapest Octane retailed at around $20,000 US. Here in the UK, allowing for inflation, that's about £21,000. But that's the very basic system. This particular system, I'm told, was originally purchased for £70,000, and that's with educational pricing discounts. Without them, I'm told it would cost over £100,000. So this is by far the most expensive system I've played Doom on to date. We will of course come on to the operating system and more software, but first let's get familiar with the hardware and find out why it commanded such a price tag, and if we can better understand why SGI garnered the reputation that it did for producing the 3D workstations to own. Aesthetically, this is an incredibly striking machine. SGI machines were quickly identifiable for their unusual shapes and bold colours in a world of boxy beige PCs. The early Octanes, like this model, have that calming green skin with the SGI Cube logo. Later revisions updated the logo in keeping with SGI's rebranding, and then its successor, the Octane 2, has the same case but it's blue in colour. Peeking through the carefully modelled fins, perhaps even modelled using SGI hardware itself, we can see a metal honeycomb. Heat dissipation, an important aspect of the design, as very long periods of rendering with CPU and video hardware running at 100% would not be an unusual task. This hinged door swings open to reveal a ventilation grid and unoccupied option drive bays. Reset is recessed, so you need to poke something in there to hit it, but this isn't going to be running Windows 98. We shouldn't find ourselves unable to kill locked processes and needing to hit that, except in very rare circumstances. Around the back we get the feel for the modular nature of the machine. There's a 623 watt power supply which pulls right out after releasing 2 thumb screws. If that should fail, we can be back up and running within 60 seconds of the part arriving, and that's key to SGI's marketing message. Productivity is a major part of what justifies the price tag. Time is money, and you'll get more done in less time with their hardware, and that encompasses reduced hardware downtime. The PSU can be flanked by up to 5 boards, and we have 2 present. On the left is the mandatory system module, and that includes, from the bottom up, 2 serial ports, with the first one doubling as a console port to see what's going on if you don't have a monitor plugged in, a PS2 keyboard and mouse port, a parallel port, a built-in Ethernet port, external SCSI port, and a nice selection of audio ports above that. With digital audio in and out, the Octane would actually make a nice digital audio workstation. Assuming that is, you can sing louder than the sound of the fans. We also have coaxial digital ports, 3.5mm analog audio ports, power for a set of SGI speakers, a regular stereo speaker or headphone output, and a microphone input. Audio is supplied by SGI's own low-latency RAD audio chip, which gives us 8 24-bit channels. And RAD is not an acronym, but a contraction of the word radical, because this, remember, is the 90s. That's the system module on the left. On the right we have slots for your choice of XIO modules. XIO is a high-performance bus which connects these modules directly to the memory controller, and we'll go into buses or lack thereof momentarily, but as standard you'd have your choice of video card fitted in this space. Our video card is a double width model, so it takes up 2 slots, and it has the 13W3 video output, common on workstations such as those by Sun and Next. And below that is a 3D socket, and this is for stereoscopic 3D glasses. You might also find optional cards here, such as the Octane compression card for real-time MJPEG compression, and the Octane personal video card for use with the O2 cam for a spot of video conferencing. Or perhaps you want to get even more radical by adding additional RAD cards for more audio inputs and outputs. I don't have an O2 cam, but as an aside, this is an SGI Indie cam. That was an option with the Indie Workstation, which was released in 1993, another machine we should take a look at someday. SGI then adopting cameras and video conferencing, once again to encourage and promote productivity with its machines. In the middle of the machine, above the PSU, we have a blanking plate, but optionally a PCI module could be purchased which slots in here. That would allow you to install 3 PCI cards, something regular PC owners would be much more familiar with, more so than this fancy high-speed XIO stuff. Finally, the top of the case is dominated by the fan outlet, and that's not a decorative plastic louve, that's a solid hunk of metal, and part of the reason this whole ensemble weighs in at 25 kilograms. Respects should definitely be paid then to the IT departments responsible for moving and installing these monsters.
It's certainly a stunning looking machine, I think you'll agree, and just the ports on the back tell us it has a lot of promise, but I think we really need to pull the boards out from the inside, take them over to the safety of the anti-static mat in the lab, and see what this is made up of to fully understand it.
While I'm doing that, I think it's important that we don't lose sight of what this machine was used for. It's all very well me loading up a game of Doom or Quake, but that just wouldn't do it justice. For that reason, we have Stephen. He's come to help us to tell us exactly what he used the Octane for in the late 90s when he used the machine in anger, and he's got some examples of the things he produced to show us. So let's take a look at Stephen's video and get to know the Octane a little better.
So back in 1995, I was working at IBM's UK laboratories in Winchester, particularly working in the department of virtual reality and for 3D. So I was doing a lot of VR environments and 3D studios, so there's a lot of rendering involved. And up until that point, I've been using ThinkPads and the AIX systems, which are in abundance within the labs. And I was known for staying on at night and actually stealing all of the machines so I could set up a rendering farm to pump out all those frames I needed for the next day's review. And then I happened to move offices one project into a bigger space, and under the desk was a SGI Octane, instantly recognisable. It's like the holy grail of 3D renderers, really, as far as machines goes, because the logo of the 3D Cube and the blue-green colour of the system and the design, it was just striking thing to have around. And the only reason I could think it was there, obviously being an IBM, you wouldn't expect this kind of thing to be around, was that William Lovren, who had the office before me, was doing a lot of computations for his evolutionary art. He went on, I believe, to go and do some videos for Shaman, so people might know him from that. So obviously, I grabbed this system and knew it. I was only a designer, but so I had no real technical knowledge at that time. But nevertheless, I was going to use this as much as I can. I was using Nutec's Lightwave software, which had been designed for Babylon 5, and that was available for the SGI too. So it really made a big difference to have this sea of black and beige and this one striking computer in the middle of it was, it's pretty cool, really. So I use it as a master system. I used to have to, for instance, the Mary Rose, I did animation which Prince Charles took out to the US. And it was only quite a simple animation, but it used to take me all day overnight to render the frames for that before, and whereas the SGI was doing it in just an hour or so, which is amazing, really. The resolutions weren't as high as they were now, but nevertheless, for me, it was like gold dust. So I use that as my master, for my modeler, for my renderer master, the SGI was really good at sending out the framework to the other machines to render. And I basically never really looked back after that. I used it for Tomorrow as well, to do virtual studios, and even just simple modelling tasks for my virtual reality systems that I used. So it's the one and only time I ever used an SGI. Obviously the price, when I moved on from IBM, there's no way I was going to be able to afford one. But I was lucky enough to have that as one of my early systems to use in my career. So I guess I was pretty fortunate there.
I think it's time we went back to reality. I think I'm losing my grip. Shahnaz, this is reality, isn't it?
Well, this is real, but you are not. That'll teach him to go time travelling.
Fascinating stuff, and yet more examples of the magic these things can produce thanks to Stephen's insights. This then is the system module, and we've pulled out the chassis because I don't really fancy lifting this whole machine over to the lab. The system module is mostly dominated by huge, finned lumps of metal sinking away heat from the chips. Now, a home PC owner of the day would open up their PC and expect to find a motherboard with a CPU, some RAM, and a variety of expansion slots for your video, sound cards, and any other add-ons that you may have. And we have those familiar components too. The CPU, or in this case CPUs, are in this module covered by the large heatsink. We've got two R10000 CPUs running at 195 MHz each. The RAM is over here, and we've got no less than 8 memory modules on board, amounting to 640 megabytes. These are 200-pin SD RAM modules, and they're split into 4 pairs with 1 bank per pair. They have such features as ECC for error correcting and are registered or buffered, making them more stable and, of course, more expensive. I think in the late 90s I had 32 megabytes of RAM in my home PC at this point, so there's nearly 20 times as much here. And of course we mentioned the RAD audio chip, which is tucked under the CPU module. In fact, if I just swap these system modules over, here's an unpopulated system module, so you can see that the RAD chip sits here churning out 24-bit audio, and the CPU module would slot in here next to it. The whole system module tray plugs into a backplane in the chassis via these. They're compression connectors and they have 96 gold pads each. They're extremely easy to ruin with the smallest amount of dust, and there are strict instructions in the manual not to touch or wipe them under any circumstances. If you're being extra careful, you should keep a compression connector cap over them, which I don't have, so I'm keeping these boards out of the chassis for as short a time as possible. In your regular home PC, the CPU and RAM would communicate on a system bus, and other buses such as the PCI bus, in which, for example, your sound card would sit, would branch off from this to provide a communications channel between the peripherals and the CPU. All the devices on the PCI bus would share the bandwidth between them. As technology progressed from the late 90s, that became a bottleneck for our PCs, leading to the development of additional buses like the AGP port used for our video cards alongside the PCI bus. Meanwhile, the big boys at SGI took another approach. The Octane is based on SGI's X-Talk architecture. It doesn't use a system bus, and it has a packet-switched high-bandwidth bus for the XIO slots in which our video card sits. Instead of a classic PC system bus, you can imagine the Octane to be more like a network switch in its operation. Every part of the system has its own dedicated channel or port to the main memory and CPU. This is known as the crossbar switch. 7 ports exist on the switch to mainline subsystems into the CPU and RAM resources that they need, and no subsystem will compete with any other subsystem for bandwidth on the other ports. Each has a dedicated path of its own on the crossbar switch. If we scale this up to an even more powerful SGI machine like the SGI Origin servers seen here, that model has an 8th port on the crossbar switch to connect it with other crossbar switches, an uplink if you like, with support for up to 128 CPUs. So we can think of our Octane a little like a single node Origin server without that uplink port. The crossbar switch really is a standout feature in these machines. It's managed by a custom ASIC or application-specific integrated circuit designed by SGI, one of the most complex created at the time, and each of those ports has a 2 megabyte cache buffer. The ports can link to multiple subsystems at once, and each has an 800 megabyte per second throughput in each direction. The result is a system whereby if you can't afford, for example, to drop a single frame in video editing, when compositing live video, or maybe you're accessing a 67GB image file, not uncommon if you worked somewhere like Lofive, then you can guarantee a responsive experience thanks to the crossbar switch. 2 seconds, by the way. That's how quickly SGI were able to demonstrate a 67GB image file opening in the late 90s with their hardware, although not with our particular Octane. The CPUs used in the Octane are reduced instruction set computer or RISC processors, these particular ones developed by MIPS computer systems. We've come across RISC processors on the channel before, notably in the Acorn RISC PC, although that was an extremely rare example owing to Intel's dominance in that market. The philosophy of a RISC CPU is simple. An instruction should take at most a single data memory cycle to complete, as opposed to multiple cycles like a CISC or complex instruction set computer, like those used in an x86 processor. It's all about efficiency, and I particularly like the explanation of Joel Birnbaum of Hewlett-Packard back in 1986.
I think the notion is that computers spend most of their time, 80% of their time is a symbolic number, doing a few simple things and don't do the complex things very often. And so the notion is that if you optimize the machine to do the simplest things as well as possible and to do the complex things as infrequently as possible, then you might come out with a machine which for certain types of jobs would be more effective than those which pay the penalty of complexity across all of the things that it does each of the times that it does them.
Similar processors would also be found in NEC supercomputers of the time, and if you ever owned the first PlayStation or Nintendo 64, then you had a MIPS processor. Now before we get any dust on that compression connector, let's get the board back into the chassis and we'll have a look at the video board. Moving briefly to our video card, a variety of video card options were available for the Octane at launch, and later models were released for the Octane successor, the Octane 2, which was a very similar machine, almost identical in fact. And those later cards were compatible with our Octane. The result was a choice of around 12 cards by the end of its lifetime. This card is an SSI video card, later renamed to the SSE, and you can see it occupies 2 of the 4 available XIO expansion bays labelled A through to D. On the scale of Octane video cards, ours is about mid-range performance-wise. The specs of our card include a 27MB frame buffer and no hardware texture memory. This isn't a big problem when it comes to rendering scenes for video playback, but if we wanted to review textured models in real time, or play Quake for example, yes, I know this thing isn't made for playing games really, real-time rendering of textured 3D graphics will take a severe performance hit without that texture RAM. But we can add texture memory modules on the card itself. The very top-end card by the end of the Octane's lifetime was the V12, and that offered 128MB frame buffer and 104MB of texture cache. The launch price of the V12 video card, just $28,495 or about the price of 90 NVIDIA GeForce 4 cards at the time. We'll carefully return that module back to the chassis now. It's also worth mentioning that the dual head option kit was also available. With this you had 2 video cards and a PCI card with additional keyboard and mouse ports. This would allow 2 people to work from one Octane completely independently with their share of resources guaranteed thanks to that crossbar switch. The machine may be out of sight with just 2 keyboards and monitors and mice on the desk, and the operators would have no idea that they were working from the same hardware and wouldn't be fighting for each other's resources or slowing each other's tasks down while enjoying full HD 1920x1200 resolution displays at 72Hz. Try that on your late 90s Pentium 2 PC. Onto storage then, the Octane contains 2 wide SCSI buses, one for the internal and one for external devices. It supports ultra SCSI speeds, so that has a theoretical rate of 40 megabytes a second, and the hard drive is hidden away here. The bays all have a single connector attachment, or SCA, so no special disks are required, just the caddy. And you could also fit, for example, an iOmega zip drive or an LTO tape drive to back up your work without a problem here. Did you hear that, Pixar? To back up your work. If you want to add a CD-ROM drive, then you can use the rear external SCSI connector for an external drive, as there are no 5 1/4 inch bays in the front. To be honest, you'd probably be accessing most files over the network anyway. A hardware RAID controller could also be added if you wanted to increase speed, redundancy or both, with extra hard disks in the remaining slots. Pretty standard stuff and exactly as it should be. No expensive proprietary disks needed should yours fail.
Well, that's our SGI Octane Primer. It's a machine with a definite stage presence. It's a machine with a sense of purpose, and it was a machine that was catered specifically for that purpose. But was it fit for purpose? That's a question that I'd like to answer, and not just by tagging 5 minutes of captured footage to the end of this video. I'd like to make an entire episode dedicated to the operation of the machine. We'll take a look at the IRIX operating system, popular applications of the time, and delve into things like 3D rendering and see exactly how powerful and how quick this machine was for a late 90s machine. Yes, you can have a little look at Doom running a bit more, and no, it doesn't run Crysis before you ask. I'm sure you still will in the comments. If you, like Stephen in the episode today, used the Octane in anger, if you've got examples of the work you created on it, or if you'd just like to share your memories and be part of that second episode, please do leave a comment. I'll be making it in a couple of weeks' time from when this is released. And the more of you out there that I can include, the more memories of this machine that I can include, the better the picture we can build of it. So I'd love to include you. Leave a comment if you'd like to be involved. Until then, thank you as always for watching. Thank you for exploring another fascinating machine, and see you next time. Take care.
If you enjoy my content and would like to toss a coin into the hat to support the cave, then check out patreon.com/retromancave and join the official cave dwellers you can see on the screen now. Thank you for your support.